What's up, guys? Corey Erdman here in the Fight Network studios, getting you up to date on everything in the world of boxing. And last night, Fight Network presented Golden Boy live from the State Farm Arena in Hidalgo, Texas. In the main event, former U.S. Olympian Diaz demolished Raul Hidalgo over 7 rounds, scoring 4 knockdowns en route to his 12th professional victory, and arguably the most impressive of his young career. In the co-feature, Fidel Maldonado Jr. had more trouble than expected with Nelson Lara in a fight that actually turned out to be a bit of a war. Maldonado spent a lot of time inviting exchanges that he maybe didn't have to be a part of, and it made for some scary moments for the Atrisco kid. In the 8th round, Maldonado staggered Lara with a right hook that sent him into the ropes for a knockdown. Not long after, Tony Garcia waved the fight off, perhaps a little too early for most people's liking. But unfortunately, the card will be remembered for the fact that Ricardo Alvarez, brother of Canelo Alvarez and a fighter who was, rightfully or not, one step away from fighting for a world title earlier this year, was allowed to fight 46-year-old John Michael Johnson. Yes, that is the same John Michael Johnson who stopped Junior Jones for the WBA bantamweight title in 1994. That is also the same John Michael Johnson who had fought just once since 2002 before last night, a 4-rounder against a 13-37 fighter. Johnson is a full-time power plant foreman who keeps himself in shape by running to and from work every day. Now, although Johnson lost, the fight actually turned out to be competitive. In one way, that's a good thing because Johnson didn't get severely hurt inside the ring. However, because of that, everyone can now just move on and shrug their shoulders as if this insane matchup was never made. On top of the very obvious details that made this so egregious, Alvarez was then allowed to weigh in at 145.25 pounds, while Johnson weighed in at just 137.5. Unless the Texas Commission and Golden Boy Promotions knew that Ricardo Alvarez was underwhelming enough to not be able to distinguish himself inside the ring from a 46-year-old plant worker who, in his own words, had spent 3 years eating tacos, then they are at fault for creating an incredibly dangerous situation. But they didn't know, nor did they care. The fact that Ricardo Alvarez isn't very good just happened to bail them out. And now, we sit and wait for the next welterweight who needs to fight a 46-year-old blown-up bantamweight in order to add a win over a former world champion onto their resume. Because now, both Texas and Golden Boy have all the justification they need to make yet another matchup just like this. On to fighters who are on a more reasonable comeback trail. Lucien Bute will return on December 6th at the Bell Center in Montreal, Quebec, when he takes on former title challenger Roberto Bolonti. Bute hasn't fought since his blowout loss at the hands of Jean Pascal in January in what was one of the biggest boxing events in the history of Canada. Since then, he's split with longtime trainer Stéphane LaRouche and has acquired the services of Hall of Fame trainer Freddie Roach. Against Pascal, and even against Denis Grachev before that, Bute has seemed somewhat hesitant offensively. Though the assumption is that Carl Froch ruined him during their 2012 showdown, Bute hasn't proven to have a vulnerable chin necessarily since then. But he has most certainly been gun-shy, and if there's anything at all left in the tank, perhaps an offensive-minded trainer like Roach can help him get just a little bit more mileage. Bolonti was last seen dropping a decision to regular WBA titleist Jürgen Brähmer, which would be a logical direction for Bute to go in himself if he can pick up a win. Brähmer could most certainly be lured into defending his title in Montreal, which would do good business, and set up a less desirable rematch with Pascal or with lineal champ Adonis Stevenson. And lastly, some sad news, as yesterday legendary boxing promoter Dan Goossen passed away at the age of 64 due to complications with liver cancer. Goossen was one of the sport's most beloved characters, an outlier in a world where promoters are often the enemy of fans and the media. The Goose always had an eye for talent, first discovering Rafael and Gabriel Ruelas when they were selling candy door-to-door in California. The two went on to become world champions, and Goossen would go on to lead a litany of fighters to titles and to stardom, such as Michael Nunn, James Toney, Terry Norris, David Reed, David Tua, Paul Williams, and most recently, Andre Ward. He's been credited as one of the driving and binding forces behind the creation of the Showtime Super 6 tournament, which his fighter Ward ultimately won. Everyone inside the boxing media will miss his engaging and generous personality and his colorful quotes as much as we'll miss his colorful suits sticking out from ringside. Rest in peace, Dan.